Hello, friends. If this joke tickled your funny bone, don't forget to hit subscribe. It's an easy way to keep the humor flowing into your feed. Don't miss last.
A blonde walks into an electronics store and asks to speak with the manager. Once he approaches, she points to a TV and asks, "How much is that TV?" The manager looks at her, then replies, "I'm sorry, but I don't sell to blondes." Fuming with anger, the blonde storms out of the store, determined to find a way around this. That night, she gets an idea and decides to dye her hair red. The next day, she returns to the same store and approaches the manager. "How much is that TV?" she asks again. The manager responds, "I'm sorry, but I don't sell to blondes." Frustrated but not defeated, she goes home, dyes her hair black, and returns to the store the next day, convinced she's got it figured out. She walks up to the manager and asks, "How much is that TV?" The manager sighs and shakes his head. "I'm sorry, but I don't sell to blondes." The blonde, now completely confused, says, "How do you know I'm a blonde?" "I dyed my hair." The manager looks at her and replies with a smile, "That's not a TV, that's a microwave." Optimus Prime was relaxing at home, watching TV, when suddenly the power went out. Frustrated, he picked up the phone and called the electrical company, hoping to get things fixed quickly. Within a short time, a lineman showed up to assess the situation. As Optimus went to speak with the lineman, he noticed something odd. His jaw wouldn't move. Realizing he needed some lubrication, he ran to the garage and grabbed a bottle of motor oil to grease his mechanical mouth. 10 minutes later, he returned to the house, his mouth full of motor oil, and approached the lineman. "Why did my power go out?" he asked, trying to speak through the oil. The lineman glanced at him quickly and said with a smirk, "Well, sir, it looks like you've blown a transformer." Grandpa and Grandma were sitting on the couch, watching an evangelical show on TV. The preacher spoke to the viewers at home, saying, "If you want to be healed, place one hand on the television and the other on the part of your body that needs healing." Grandma, with her arthritic shoulder giving her trouble, slowly got up and hobbled to the TV. She placed her right hand on the screen and her left hand on her painful shoulder, hoping for some relief. Grandpa, not one to miss an opportunity, got up as well. He approached the TV, placed his right hand on the set, and then, much to Grandma's surprise, placed his left hand on his crotch. Grandma turned to him with a scowl and said, "I guess you just don't get it. The point of this is to heal the sick, not to raise the dead." A wealthy man, after 50 years of marriage, sat down one evening and looked at his wife with a thoughtful expression. "You know," he began, "50 years ago we had a small house and an old car. We used to sleep on the couch, watching a tiny black and white TV. But every night I went to bed with a beautiful 19-year-old girl." He paused, then added, "Now I have a huge mansion, a collection of expensive cars, a massive bed in a luxurious bedroom, and a widescreen color TV. But instead of a 19-year-old girl, I'm sharing my bed with a 69-year-old woman. I'm starting to question my marriage." His wife, without missing a beat, looked at him and smiled. "Well, dear," she said, "if you want to go back to a 19-year-old girl, I can arrange that for you. But if you do, I'll make sure you end up back in a small house, sleeping on a sagging couch, watching a black and white TV." A young lady had been waiting for her date for over an hour and a half, her excitement slowly turning into frustration. Finally, she decided she'd been stood up. With a sigh, she changed out of her dinner dress and into her pajamas and slippers, popped some popcorn, and settled in front of the TV for what she figured would be a lonely evening. Just as she plopped down on the couch, the doorbell rang. She opened the door, and there stood her date. He took one look at her and, without missing a beat, said, "I'm 2 hours late, and you're still not ready?" A TV crew decided to visit a 100-year-old man who was living alone in a cabin deep in the woods. When they arrived, they were shocked to find him chopping wood and carrying it all by himself, his energy and strength surprising them. Despite his age, he appeared as fit and healthy as a man in his 40s. Curious, the crew asked, "What's your secret?" The old man smiled and began his story. 70 years ago, there was a massive blizzard that came out of nowhere. It was winter, but it hadn't been too cold for a week. The snow had only been light, but then the wind picked up, and the storm intensified. One evening I went outside to call my dog when I noticed a faint light coming from the woods. Someone must have gotten lost and was trying to find their way to safety. I started calling for my dog, but I knew the lost person would hear me, and sure enough, the light got closer and closer. Finally, I saw a man holding a flashlight. I ran out to help him, but the wind was so strong and the snow was so thick I couldn't see more than 20 feet ahead. I guided him inside the cabin just as my dog came running in, and I barely managed to close the door against the storm. I helped the man remove his jacket and boots and sat him by the fire. He was in shock but unharmed. We poured ourselves some whiskey to calm down, and I served up a bowl of stew I'd been making. He was so relieved and started thanking me, saying he thought he was going to die out there until he heard me calling my dog. He said he gathered the last of his strength and followed my voice to safety. After we ate, we both decided to sleep, but I only had one bed, so we decided to share it. It was cold, after all, and our bodies would keep each other warm. Well, things got a little heated. One thing led to another, and before we knew it, we were kissing and then making love. It was the most passionate night I've ever had, even though we were both exhausted from the storm. The next morning, the weather cleared up. After breakfast, the man got up, put on his jacket, and said he had to leave. He had a wife and 3 children waiting for him, and they'd be worried. He gave me a big, juicy kiss on the cheek and left. As I watched him go, I realized I never even asked his name. That was the last time I ever saw him. The TV crew looked at each other, stunned by the story. After a few moments of silence, one of them spoke up, asking again, "No, we meant, what's your secret for living such a long and active life?" The old man grinned and shrugged. "Oh, that. Clean air, regular exercise, healthy food, no stress. You know, that kind of stuff." A blonde decided she was going to prove once and for all that blondes are just as smart as anyone else. To do this, she spent a fortune, $1 million, to rent out an entire stadium, filling it with 80,000 other blondes. The grand event was broadcast live on TV, and she called one brave volunteer up to the stage to answer some simple questions and demonstrate blonde intelligence. With a smile, she turned to the young blonde volunteer and asked, "All right, let's start easy. What's 20 plus 3? The blonde hesitated, her brow furrowing in deep concentration, and then she timidly whispered into the microphone, 9. The crowd of 80,000 blondes gasped and then immediately shouted in unison, "Give her another chance! Give her another chance!" The lead blonde, trying to calm the situation, agreed and reassured the audience. She decided to simplify things even further. "Okay, let's try this one, dear. What's 2 plus 2? The young blonde thought for a long moment, clearly deep in thought before she nervously whispered, "Four." This time, 80,000 blondes screamed out in unison, "Give her another chance! Give her another chance!" A TV anchor was out in the countryside and decided to interview a shepherd about his goats. Curious about the shepherd's daily life, the anchor asked, "What do you feed your goats?" The shepherd, with a twinkle in his eye, replied, "Which one, the black or the white?" The anchor, a bit confused, asked, The black one." "Grass," the shepherd answered. "And the white one?" the anchor pressed. Also grass, the shepherd said with a grin. The anchor, trying to get a bit more detail, asked, "How do you bathe them?" "Which one, the black or the white?" The shepherd replied just as casually. "Ah, the black one," said the anchor. "With water," the shepherd answered. "And the white one?" the anchor asked. "Also with water," the shepherd replied, unfazed. By now the anchor was starting to get frustrated. "Where do you house them? Which one, the black or the white?" the shepherd asked again. "The black one," the anchor sighed. "In the large barn," the shepherd said. "And the white one?" the anchor continued. "Also in the large barn," the shepherd repeated. The anchor, clearly irritated by now, snapped, "Moron! If you treat them both the same way, why do you keep asking me which one? The black or the white?" The shepherd smiled and answered, "Because the white goat is mine." The anchor, still confused, asked, "And the black one?" The shepherd chuckled and said, "That one is also mine." Walter had worked for British Rail in a small village for many years, performing the same simple task day after day. He was a track switcher. Every morning, he would sit in his little hut by the railway line and switch the points to make sure the trains ran smoothly. One day, after years of working the same job, Walter decided it was time to move up in the world. He felt he was ready for a promotion, so he wrote to British Rail asking to be considered for a higher position. Much to his surprise, they invited him to head office in London to speak with a manager. After the usual formalities and questions during the interview, the manager decided to test Walter's knowledge and decision-making ability. "Now, Walter," the manager began, "imagine you're sitting in your hut and you see that two trains are heading toward each other on the same track. What would you do?" Walter smiled confidently. "Oh, that's easy. I'd give one train a stop signal, give the other one a go-slow signal, then I'd switch the points to put one train into the siding while the other one passes safely by." The manager nodded, but decided to make the situation a little more challenging. "Okay, but imagine on this day there's a power failure and the signal lights aren't working. What do you do?" "Ah, that's simple," said Walter. "I'd just get out my emergency flags and set those up, then I'd switch the points by hand." "All right, but now picture this," said the manager, leaning forward. "It's a foggy morning and the flags won't be visible." Walter thought for a moment, then answered, "No problem. I'd just use my flares instead." The manager raised an eyebrow. "But, Walter, when you go to get your flares, you find that they've been stolen." Walter paused for a second, then a wicked grin spread across his face. In that case," he said, "I'd run home and fetch my kids." The manager was taken aback. "Why would you do that?" Walter looked the manager straight in the eye and replied, "Because they've never seen a train crash before." Last week, a group of Hell's Angels bikers were cruising down the highway when they came across a girl standing on the edge of a railway bridge looking like she was about to jump. The leader of the pack, Blaze Wilder, a big, burly man of 53, stepped off his Harley and made his way through the crowd of gawkers and police officers gathered around. "Hey, baby, what you doing up there on that railing?" Blaze called out. The girl looked down at him and said, "I'm going to commit suicide." Blaze, not missing a beat, grinned and said, "Well, before you jump, sugar, how about you give old Blaze here your best goodbye kiss?" Without a moment's hesitation, the girl leaned back over the railing and gave him a long, deep kiss, followed by a few more passionate, lingering ones. Blaze's biker buddies, the onlookers, and even the police couldn't help but cheer and clap. Blaze, wiping his lips and looking impressed, said, "Wow! That was the best kiss I've ever had. You've got real talent, sugar. You could be famous if you rode with me, but why the heck are you trying to commit suicide?" The girl looked at him and sighed. "My parents don't like me dressing up like a girl." A small, sad man sat alone at the bar, staring down at a beer in front of him. His eyes were filled with despair as he took a deep breath and tried to push back the tears. A large, tough-looking guy swaggered up to him, slapped him on the shoulder, and without a word, grabbed the man's beer and drank it down in one gulp. The little man looked up at him, his eyes welling up with tears, and he began to sob uncontrollably. The big guy, shrugging and laughing, said, "Come on, don't be a wimp. Crying over a beer?" The little man wiped his eyes and sniffled, then spoke with a voice full of anguish. "Well, listen to this. This morning, my wife left me and our bank account was empty. The house is empty, too. After that, I lost my job. I didn't want to go on, so I decided to end it all. I went to the railway tracks to throw myself in front of a train, but no train came. Then I tried to hang myself, but the rope snapped. Next, I tried to shoot myself, but the revolver jammed. And now I finally bought myself a beer with my last bit of money, poured all my rat poison into it, and you just drank it all." A man stands in court, facing serious charges. The judge looks at him sternly and says, "You are accused of beating your wife to death. If you expect any mercy, you better give us a damn good reason." The man sighs and replies, "She was so stupid, I just had to kill her." The judge shakes his head in disbelief. "That's even worse. If you want to avoid being declared guilty right here, you need to give a plausible reason." The man, clearly distressed, begins to explain. "It all started one day when we were talking about the neighbors. The property manager and his family live on the first floor. And the kids, well, they all have a growth deficiency. So my wife looks at them and says, 'Those little kids, they look like Pyrenees.'" The judge, confused, asks, "Do you mean pygmies?" The man shakes his head. No. She insists, "Pygmy is what you have under your skin. It causes freckles." The man pauses, shaking his head in disbelief. I tell her, "That's pigment, not pygmy." The judge, growing more bewildered, says, "What did she say to that?" The man continues, "She says, 'No, pigment is what the ancient Romans wrote on.' So I tell her, 'That's a parchment.'" The judge is now completely perplexed. "What did she say?" The man sighs. "She sees, no, parchment is an unfinished sentence." The judge rubs his temple, trying to keep up. "And then?" The man leans forward. "I tried to ignore it. I just sat back in my armchair with my newspaper, but then she comes back with a book and says, 'I should know I got a Legionnaire for my French lessons.'" The judge now looks ready to lose his patience. "A Legionnaire? You mean a lector, right?" The man nods. "Exactly. But no," she says. "No, Lector was an ancient Greek hero." I tell her, "That was Hector, and he was a Trojan." The judge now stares at him in shock. "What did she say to that?" The man shakes his head. "She says, 'Nope, Hector is a measure of area.'" The judge sighs. "A hectare?" The man laughs bitterly. "That's what I said." But she insists, "No, hectare is the drink of the gods." The judge frowns. "That's nectar." The man rubs his face in frustration. "Exactly." But she says, "No, nectar is a river in southern Germany." The judge's face is one of total confusion now. "What did you say?" The man leans in. I told her, "That's the neg." The judge, now incredulous, asks, "And then what happened?" The man pauses, eyes narrowing. She says, "No, I must know. There's even a song about it. I recently sang it in a duet with my friend." The judge, completely lost, replies, A duet? No, wait, you mean a duet, right?" The man groans in frustration. "No," she says, "that's when two men fight with sabers." The judge can't take it anymore. "That's a duel," the man says. "Exactly." But she says, "No, a duel is when a railway goes through a mountain." The judge, utterly exasperated, looks at the man in disbelief. "And then you?" The man sighs deeply. "Well, Your Honor, at that point, I just grabbed a hammer and beat her to death." There is a long silence in the courtroom. All eyes are on the judge, whose expression is one of pure shock. Finally, the judge shakes his head, clears his throat, and says, "Not guilty. Honestly, I would have killed her at Hector." Two men were walking through the woods when they came across a big, deep hole. "Wow, that looks really deep," said one. "Let's toss a few pebbles in and see how deep it is." They tossed in a few small pebbles and waited, but there was no sound. "Gee, that is a really deep hole," said the other. "Let's throw one of these big rocks in. That should make some noise." They picked up two large rocks about the size of a football and tossed them into the hole. They waited, but still there was no sound. There's a railway sleeper over here in the weeds," said one of the men. "If we toss that in, it's definitely going to make some noise." They dragged the heavy railway sleeper over to the hole and heaved it in, but again, there was no sound. Just then, out of the nearby woods, a goat suddenly appeared, running at full speed. It charged toward the two men, ran right between them, and leapt into the air before disappearing into the hole. The two men stood there in complete astonishment, unsure of what they had just witnessed. A farmer appeared from the woods and called out, Hey, did you guys see my goat?" "You bet we did," said one of the men, still shaken. "It was the craziest thing. It came running like the wind out of the woods and jumped right into that hole." The farmer looked puzzled and said, "Nah, that couldn't have been my goat. My goat was chained to a railway sleeper." An old man was traveling by train from his hometown of Offenburg to visit his family in Frankfurt am Main. It was quite a journey for him, since he didn't often travel far from home. As the train chugged along, the conductor walked by, calling out, "Heidelberg, get off!" The old man, a little confused, but thinking it was a sign, quickly got off the train, marveling at how modern technology allowed the railway company to announce passengers' names for their stops. Once he was on the platform, he heard the call again, this time more urgently, "Heidelberg, come in!" Thinking it was part of the process, he hastily boarded the next train that was ready to depart. He sat down and, in an unusually good mood, decided to strike up a conversation with a fellow passenger. "Where are you headed?" the old man asked. "To Regensburg," the passenger replied. The old man slapped his knees, a look of excitement spreading across his face. "What a time to be alive," he said. "I'm going to Frankfurt, you're going to Regensburg, and we're both on the same train." Greaser Bob swaggered into his favorite local dive bar, the smell of stale beer and cigar smoke hanging in the air. He approached the counter and, with a grin stretched across his face, ordered a cold beer. The bartender, a tall, wiry man named Chuck, was wiping down the counter when he noticed Bob's unusually proud demeanor. "Well, well, Greaser Bob," Chuck said with a raised eyebrow. "You're looking mighty pleased with yourself today. Did you hit the lottery or something?" Bob took a seat at the bar, leaned back, and stretched out his arms like he owned the place. With a smug look on his face, he answered, "Nah, nothing like that. Last night on my way home, I had to cross the railway tracks, and that's when I saw her." Chuck leaned in, his curiosity piqued. "Saw who?" "A girl," Bob continued, his voice low and dramatic. "She was tied up tight to the tracks, just waiting for the train to come." Chuck's eyes widened. He leaned back in his seat, his thoughts racing. That's horrifying. "You're telling me you rescued her?" Bob nodded, his chest puffing out. "Yeah. I untied her, dragged her back to my place, and we spent the whole night together." The bartender was stunned. "I can't even imagine what it must have been like for her. The fear, the desperation, waiting on those cold steel rails for the train to come. She must have been thankful, right? Was she pretty?" Bob let out a short laugh, but there was a hint of something sinister in his tone. "Well, that's the thing," he said with a shrug. "It was dark. Couldn't really tell what she looked like." Chuck raised an eyebrow, sensing something off. "What do you mean? You didn't even get a good look at her face." Bob's grin turned crooked as he replied, "Nope. I never did find her head." One day, a thief snatched a phone from a blonde woman and took off running, but instead of chasing after him, she just stood there laughing. Her friend, who saw the whole thing, came over and asked, "Hey, that guy just stole your phone and you're laughing about it. What's so funny?" The blonde woman chuckled and said, "Let him run. The charger's still with me." While on vacation, the warden of a supermax prison received a call from his subordinate, who had been left in charge. "Got some good news and bad news," the subordinate said, his voice filled with an odd sense of urgency. The warden, already bracing himself for something bad, replied, "Okay, give me the good news first." "Well," the subordinate said, "one of the serial killers serving multiple life sentences escaped." The warden paused, his mind racing. "How is that good news?" The subordinate explained. "Well, after escaping, he stole a car and led police on a high-speed chase. The chase ended when he crashed the car into a tree at 120 miles per hour. He was killed instantly, and no one else was harmed." The warden, relieved that no one else was hurt, sighed with a sense of relief. "Oh, well, I guess that is good news then. But what's the bad news?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line before the subordinate spoke again. "It was your car." A man was sitting at home watching the news when the anchor suddenly announced, "Breaking news! A gorilla has escaped from the local zoo." The man's heart skipped a beat as he glanced out of the window and saw a gorilla casually perched in his garden tree. Panicking, he quickly called the zoo, and within moments, an animal catcher arrived in a large van. The catcher stepped out, carrying a police baton, a pair of handcuffs, a pit bull on a leash, and a shotgun. "I need your help," he said, walking toward the man. He began explaining the plan. "I'll climb up into the tree and use this baton to poke the gorilla down. When he falls, the pit bull will attack his genitals. It's trained for that. Once the gorilla tries to protect himself, you're going to slip the handcuffs on him, and we'll have him captured." The man nodded, slightly unsure but willing to help. "Sounds good so far," he said, still a bit nervous. "But, why do you have a shotgun in the van?" The catcher replied, "Well, if the gorilla manages to knock me down instead, you'll need to shoot the dog." Two priests were enjoying a round of golf together on a beautiful sunny afternoon. Father Bob, a bit out of practice, took his first swing, but his ball veered off course and landed deep into the woods. "Damn it, that totally missed," he exclaimed in frustration. Father Michael, who was more seasoned in both golf and his faith, frowned and said, "Father Bob, you shouldn't curse like that. God might punish you for it." Father Bob, embarrassed, quickly apologized, and the two continued on their way. On his second swing, Father Bob's ball sailed right into the sand pit. "Damn it, that totally missed!" he cursed again, clearly getting frustrated. Father Michael shook his head. "I told you, Father Bob, watch your words. God might punish you for this." Father Bob, feeling guilty, apologized once more, and they carried on playing. Finally, on his third swing, Father Bob hit his ball too hard, sending it straight into the pond. "Damn it, that totally missed!" he cursed again, now utterly frustrated with his game. Before Father Michael could say a word, a dark and ominous cloud suddenly gathered in the sky, blocking out the sun. A bolt of lightning struck from the heavens and hit Father Michael, instantly killing him. Father Bob stood there, shocked and horrified, not understanding what was happening. But before he could comprehend the situation, he heard a deep, thunderous voice booming from the sky. "Damn it, that totally missed." It was a dark and stormy night when a man and his wife were suddenly woken up at 3 a.m. by a loud pounding on their front door. The husband groggily got out of bed, stumbled down the hallway, and opened the door, only to find a drunken stranger standing on the doorstep, drenched by the pouring rain. "Can I help you?" the husband asked, squinting in the dim light. "I need a push," slurred the stranger, swaying on his feet. The husband, barely awake and annoyed by the disturbance, snapped, "Not a chance. It's 3 a.m. Get lost." He slammed the door shut and trudged back to bed, muttering under his breath. "Who was that?" his wife asked, still half asleep. "Just some drunk guy asking for a push," he replied, rolling over to go back to sleep. "Did you help him?" she asked, her voice slightly more awake now. "No, of course not," he grumbled. "It's the middle of the night, and it's absolutely pouring with rain outside. What kind of idiot would ask for a push at this hour?" His wife sat up, clearly not satisfied with his answer. "Well, I think you have a short memory. Don't you remember when we broke down 3 months ago and those 2 guys helped us in the middle of nowhere? You should help him. You should be ashamed of yourself. God loves drunk people too, you know," she added, giving him a pointed look. Reluctantly, the husband sighed, rolled out of bed, got dressed, and went back outside into the torrential downpour. He called out into the dark, "Hello, are you still there?" "Yes," came the reply, muffled by the rain. "Do you still need a push?" the husband asked, now shivering in the cold. "Yes, please," came the slurred answer. "Where are you?" the husband called out, scanning the darkness. "Over here on the swing," the drunk man replied.